You don't have to stay late, Nancy. We've got it covered, Brent said, waving a Red Bull like it was a damn trophy. He was 27, smelled like Axe body spray and wet drywall, and had just been named lead infrastructure engineer. My title? Still senior systems specialist, a name they cooked up back when I was duct taping the back end together with baling wire and Stack Overflow at 3 a.m. At 9:17 p.m. that Tuesday, I was elbows deep in legacy server rot while Brent was bragging to the board over old fashions, using my architecture diagrams like they were his baby's first crayon drawings. The best part? I'd written the damn documentation in a shared drive labeled "Read Me, morons." Guess they actually did. The system audit was failing. Again, vulnerabilities like Swiss cheese. And the CTO, Clay I had a startup once Morley, hadn't touched a single terminal in 3 years. He'd copied my designs into his pitch deck last quarter, then told the board he personally refactored the architecture to be cloud native. Which is hilarious, because Clay still types with 2 fingers and once asked me if Linux was that thing on Tesla dashboards. I didn't argue. I patched the container isolation flaw, rerouted the failing cron jobs, and left a note that said, "All yours, sir," in the commit comments, just subtle enough to be ignored, just bitter enough to taste. By the way, if you're still listening and haven't hit subscribe or like yet, well, you're basically Brent, and nobody wants to be Brent. It seriously helps the team, and who knows, maybe one of these stories will save your bacon someday. Anyway, I was done being surprised. Promotions came and went like seasonal allergies. If you didn't wear the right polo or chuckle at Clay's bourbon jokes, you were invisible. I wore thrifted cardigans and had opinions. Double whammy. That night, instead of crying in the elevator or rage buying a punching bag off Amazon, I did something much better. I started documenting. Everything. Not for HR, they wouldn't care. Not for revenge yet, just for truth. Screenshots of emails where Clay took credit for system hardening I did during a holiday outage. Git logs with my timestamps. Slack messages where Brent asked me what DNS even stood for. I created a folder on my personal drive called ARC because I knew the flood was coming, and I damn well intended to be the only one floating. That weekend, I pulled out my original contract from Synthrix. Clause 14. Severance Protocol. Employee must receive written documentation of termination and agreed upon compensation within 72 hours of exit meeting. Huh. Cute. Also cute, the junior hire Brent asking me how to connect to the admin panel after they gave him the keys. I kept working in silence. I trained him, I wrote the docs. I pretended like it was all normal, but something sharp and electric had taken root in my gut, not fear, not even rage, clarity. I started coding on my own machine again, not for Synthrix. For something else, something real, something mine. I didn't know it then, but I'd already struck the match. All I had to do was wait for Clay to fumble with the gas can. Clay called it a check-in like we were equals grabbing coffee to chat about the weather. He chose the glass conference room, the one that baked like a lizard tank in the afternoon sun, so the whole floor could watch me sit there pretending not to sweat through my blouse. He smiled like a weatherman delivering bad news with charm. "You've peaked here, Nancy. No offense." "Oh, none taken. Clay, right up there with 'it's not you, it's the economy and you're just too qualified." I nodded, said got it, and listened while he explained that Synthrix needed fresh blood. Younger minds, digital natives, he called them. I guess my crime was being born before the invention of the iPhone. Brent walked by mid-meeting and winked at me through the glass like this was some episode of The Office. I didn't blink. Clay kept talking, but all I heard was static. In my mind, I was already packing my desk. The next morning, an all-hands invite pinged across the org. Subject line, org chart refresh growth alignment. Everyone got it. I didn't. I saw it pop up on my team's monitors as I walked past. Nobody met my eyes. The email might as well have said, "Nancy's being erased. Try not to get any on your shoes." They didn't fire me. Not yet. That would have taken spine. Instead, they slowly unstitched me from the quilt. My name vanished from projects. Brent got assigned my ticket queue to help him ramp faster. I was told to write transitional documentation for all my systems. I spent 6 hours explaining the load balancer setup to a guy who thought Docker was a Pixar character. At one point, I found Brent sitting in my chair, watching YouTube videos on agile hacks, while eating my sunflower seeds from my drawer. He looked up and said, "You show me again how the cron jobs sync with the third-party API?" I smiled, of course, and I did. I showed him everything, slowly, clearly. With just enough rope, HR pretended to be busy. My manager, Suresh, who used to ask me for help fixing his printer, now avoided me like I was contagious. I walked into his office one afternoon and he actually minimized a spreadsheet with my name on it. I didn't ask. I didn't need to. The layoff train had left the station and I was tied to the tracks with branded zip ties. That night I went home, poured a glass of wine, and opened the ARC folder. I pulled up the contract. I hadn't looked at it in years, buried deep in my old Yahoo inbox next to coupon spam and security alerts. But there it was. Paragraph 9, subsection B. Employee termination shall include full severance documentation and payment within a 72-hour period following formal notification. We were on day 5 since Clay's little sunshine speech. No paperwork, No severance terms, just a lot of awkward hallway smiles and suddenly forgotten invites. They thought they were being clever, drawing it out, softening the blow, making me too tired or too scared to ask questions. What they didn't realize is that being invisible doesn't mean you're powerless. It just means they stopped watching. I started printing screenshots, timestamps, calendars, internal memos that had the word restructure dated before my check-in. My printer was spitting out receipts like a Vegas slot machine, and somewhere in the back of my mind, something cracked open. A memory of an article I'd skimmed a month ago, new labor laws, employment clause amendments, something about severance delays triggering legal loopholes. The kind of thing Clay wouldn't know about until it bit him in the ass. I smiled as the last page dropped into the tray. Because the truth was I hadn't peeked. Not even close. They were just too short-sighted to see the mountain underneath them. And the avalanche already rolling. My final day at Synthrix started like any other. Stale coffee, lukewarm pity from coworkers, and Brent accidentally deleting a staging database he thought was just a backup. Classic, they didn't even give me a send-off. No card, no sheet cake in the break room, just a 2:15 p.m. wrap-up meeting on the third floor with Clay, HR, and a plastic plant wilting in the corner like my last 3 years of loyalty. Clay leaned back in his ergonomic chair like a man who thought he'd won. His fingers laced behind his head, thumbs brushing the bottom of his thinning hairline. Just want to remind you, Nancy, your contract includes a non-compete, he said like it was a mic drop. You don't touch a keyboard for a year. That's the game. I smiled, got it. Then I reached into my bag and placed a small black thumb drive on the table. Labeled in Sharpie, final configs, fully encrypted. No passwords given. Oh, I added casually, you'll need Brent to decode that. Should be fun. Clay blinked. Char cleared her throat like she wanted to die. I stood up and walked out before anyone could say another word. I made it to my car before my hands started shaking, not from fear, from restraint. You can only fake calm for so long before your body calls your bluff. But I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even check my inbox for the severance docs they promised would be processed immediately. Instead, I drove to a diner I liked, Greasy Booth. Strong coffee, waitress named Darlene who knew not to ask questions. I pulled out my folder, opened my laptop, and started my count. Day 0, verbal termination. Day 1, exit interview. Day 2, silence. Day 3, radio static. Day 4, HR finally calls. We're so sorry for the delay, Nancy. It's just been busy on our end. Clerical stuff, you know? I told her I understood, because I did. I understood exactly what they were doing. Deliberately dragging their feet, counting on me to be too exhausted or confused to notice the clock ticking past legal limits. What they didn't count on? Me calling a lawyer. Quietly. His name was Raphael. I found him through a whisper network of burned tech women who'd been left bleeding out in HR conference rooms. He sounded like he'd just finished a cigar and a chess match when he picked up. Send me your contract, and the emails, especially anything with the phrase reorg or transition. I'll call you in the morning. He called back an hour later, so he said, I have good news and hilarious news. Hit me. The good news, there's a new statute, just passed in the state legislature last quarter. Companies that fail to issue severance documentation within 7 calendar days of termination lose the right to enforce non-competes. Retroactively. I blinked. Wait, what? You heard me. It's designed to protect employees from exactly this kind of passive-aggressive purge. If they screw up the paperwork, they lose their fangs. Your countdown started the day Clay told you you've peaked. You're on day 8 now, and the hilarious part, they're still trying to enforce the clause. Sent you a cease and desist yet? Not yet, they will. Let them. Then we pounce. I sat there in the parking lot, watching the sun crawl behind the clouds like it knew a secret. My phone buzzed. Email from HR. Apologies for the delay. Please find attached your severance terms. Timestamp 4:42 p.m. Day 8. I didn't open the file. I just forwarded it to Raphael with one line. Too late? He replied 5 minutes later by a mile. I leaned back in my seat and closed my eyes. They thought they'd muzzled me. They thought I'd stay quiet, locked in the purgatory of their paperwork. But all they'd done was break their own leash. It started with a group text on a Saturday night. 3 ex-Syntrix devs I hadn't heard from in months, dropping into my phone like ghosts from a better timeline. Yo, still up for that side project? We just need your brain for the skeleton build. Name's Project Fennel now. Don't ask, I didn't. I just replied with a thumbs up in a zip file. I wasn't stupid. I didn't touch Syntrix code, not one line. I used my own machine. An old ThinkPad I kept at home, never connected to the Office VPN, never synced to company anything. My Git commits were timestamped at ungodly hours, logged in a private repo under my personal email. Weekends, late nights. After Brent had gone home to drink Coors Light and fantasize about keynote speeches he hadn't earned. What I contributed to Fennel was simple but crucial. A scalable data pipeline model I'd been sketching for years, one that Syntrix refused to implement because we can't sell invisible improvements. Clay said that once, straight-faced, while reading a Forbes article upside down. Project Fennel didn't just like the design, they built on it. 2 months after I was reorganized, they got seed funding, serious seed funding. Enough to hire, enough to launch. And just like that, my name was on their advisory board. It wasn't even formal, just a blurb on the site. Architectural consultant. A nod. A thank you, but to Syntrix, it was war. 3 days after the site went live, I got a thick envelope in the mail. No return address, no salutation. Just 10 pages of legal bark dressed in Time's New Roman armor. Clay's signature was stamped on page 2, right under the bolded headline, Cease and Desist Violation of Non-Compete Clause. Letter accused me of willful and malicious engagement in a competitive enterprise and unauthorized transfer of intellectual property. The irony? They couldn't even spell architecture correctly in the body of the complaint. I didn't panic. I didn't even finish reading it. I scanned it once, tossed it on my kitchen table, and opened a bottle of orange wine my cousin left last Christmas. It tasted like bad decisions and citrus regret, but it did the job. Next morning, Raphael CC'd me on his response. Subject, cease and desist Nancy Raines, dear counsel. Thank you for your letter dated insert desperation timestamp here. We are happy to clarify all relevant timelines. Miss Raines' contributions to Project Fennel were completed exclusively on personal time, using personal equipment, and all prior to the termination of her employment at Syntrix. Given that your client failed to meet the legal requirements for severance delivery under State Statute 214.9b, the non-compete clause referenced in your complaint is now null and void. Please advise your client to consult their calendar and their compliance department. Warm regards, Rafael V. Alvarado Legal. I read the email 3 times and laughed so hard I choked on my toast. The line about the calendar. Chef's kiss, a week passed, then 2, no reply. Just silence from Syntrix, like a drunk uncle who picked a bar fight and suddenly remembered he's never won one. Meanwhile, Project Fennel took off like a bonfire in a dry forest. People were talking. Investors were nosing around. I got a call from a startup journalist who wanted a quote. I declined. No need to shine a light where shadows still worked better. But the tension shifted. You could feel it. Like the air pressure dropped inside the Syntrix bubble and no one knew why their ears were popping. I wasn't hiding. I just wasn't performing anymore. They thought they'd buried me under fine print and NDAs. But I had something better than vengeance. Documentation. Raphael called me on a rainy Tuesday. I was in sweats, drinking tea that tasted like boiled dirt when his voice came through the speaker like it always did, casual, surgical, slightly amused. They're suing. I didn't flinch for what exactly? Breach of non-compete. Again, now they've added interference with investor relations to spice it up. Real desperate energy, I chuckled. Did they forget we already clarified the dates? Oh, they remember. They're just hoping we blink first, but I wasn't blinking. The next day, Raphael's team hit back. Hard, formal discovery request. All internal Syntrix documents related to my termination, emails, calendar invites, Slack messages, the timestamp on the severance letter, even the draft history if they had it. The goal was simple: prove the delay, show the gap, let them bury themselves under their own metadata. Clay naturally started stonewalling. Their legal team filed for extensions, claimed IT complications, said things like we're having trouble accessing historical comm logs. The usual fog machine nonsense. But they filed the lawsuit anyway, thinking pressure would make me fold. Must have thought I was scared. Maybe they pictured me alone in some apartment, fretting over court costs, begging them to settle. I wasn't. I had Raphael, a Google Drive full of receipts and time, lots of time. We built our strategy like code, clean, modular, bulletproof. The key, timeline. Every motion we filed, every question we prepped for deposition, it all orbited around one thing. When exactly was Nancy Raines fired? Because that answer, the answer, would snap their whole case in half like a dry stick. See, it's not enough for a company to say they fired you. They have to prove it, with documents, with dates, with an actual timestamp, not just corporate mood swings and whisper campaigns. And we knew they didn't have their ducks in a row. How? Because HR had already shown their cards in that apology email. Sorry for the delay, Nancy. Timestamped 8 days after my final meeting. Plain as daylight. Knew they'd blown it, and now they were trying to rewrite history with a Sharpie and prayer. But Sharpies don't work on server logs. Our prep meetings became quiet masterclasses in patience. Raphael walked me through every deposition angle like we were rehearsing for a play neither of us wanted to be in, but were both determined to steal the show. You'll be calm, he said. You'll be respectful. Let them get loud. We win when you stay small. I nodded, like a grenade. He smiled. Exactly. I barely told anyone what was happening. My mom knew something was up. She kept texting inspirational quotes about rising strong and sowing seeds in winter. I love her, but she thinks Google Drive is where they keep the Wi-Fi. Project Fennel stayed quiet. They had their own lawyers, their own growth. I wasn't about to let my drama spill into their momentum. Still, part of me hated waiting. It was like watching a storm roll in across the plain. Black sky, rising wind, but no thunder yet. Just pressure, just breathlessness. And then, as if summoned by the tension in the air, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. Just so you know, they think this will be open and shut. Clay told the CEO you're bluffing. No signature, no follow-up, just that. I read it twice and smiled to myself. Let them think that. Let Clay smirk and sip his whiskey and believe he's still the smartest guy in the room. Because when the storm hit, it wouldn't be loud. It would be legal, surgical, and irreversible. The conference room smelled like filtered air and fear. Leather chairs, sterile light, a pitcher of untouched water in the center of the table like some corporate offering to the gods of liability. Syntrix's legal team filed in like it was a dress rehearsal for a war they thought they'd already won. Clay came in last. No tie, just that smug business casual blend of confidence and cologne, like he was expecting to slap this down in an hour and still make his tea time. He gave me a nod across the table, a silent nice try in bro speak. I nodded back, didn't blink, didn't smile, just tapped the side of my notebook once and waited. Opposing counsel, some firm Syntrix paid a small fortune to wear cufflinks and pronounce precedent like it came with garnish, started by laying out their version of events. Clean narrative, polished timeline, all very curated until discovery kicked in. Raphael passed over our packet like he was handing off a menu. Per request, all relevant documentation compiled and indexed. Pages 13 through 22 are key. I recommend starting with the internal correspondence between HR and the executive team. The other side started flipping. Fast at first, then slower still. By the time they reached page 18, silence fell like a dropped curtain. Page 18 was an internal HR Slack thread. Harmless at first, chatter about the termination schedule, who needed to sign what, someone making a joke about Clay always being late to the paperwork party. Then came the kicker, a direct message, time-stamped. From the HR lead to the CEO, just a heads up, Nancy's severance paperwork didn't get filed until today. Clay didn't sign off until this morning. That puts us 9 days out. We good? 9 days. Out. The junior attorney's pen froze mid-note. Their lead counsel furrowed his brow, reread the line, and quietly muttered, 9 days? Raphael said nothing. Didn't even flinch. He just adjusted his cuffs and leaned back like he'd ordered a steak and knew it would be cooked perfectly. Clay shifted in his chair. The opposing counsel flipped back to the cover sheet. His eyes darted between the Slack timestamp and the clause in my contract that referenced severance delivery deadlines. Then to the printed statute we'd highlighted in our pre-discovery correspondence. 214.9b. Effective as of Q1 this year. Any severance document delivered beyond a 7-day threshold post-termination nullifies binding non-compete clauses retroactively. The man stared at the page like it had personally betrayed him. When exactly, he asked, eyes still down, voice tight, did you inform Miss Raines of her termination? Clay opened his mouth, closed it, then chuckled like this was just a bureaucratic mix-up. Well, verbally, I suppose, during that check-in meeting. I mean, that wasn't technically, was there an email? Not right away. A letter? Clay cleared his throat. No formal letter until later in the week. But we had discussed, do you have a timestamp for when the severance was filed? Clay looked at the HR rep. She didn't look up. I think it was Wednesday, maybe Thursday, he mumbled. It was Friday, the HR rep said flatly. Day 9, Raphael said, finally breaking his silence like he was correcting a bad Sudoku answer. No raised voices, no slamming fists, just silence thickening like wet concrete. I sat still. Eyes steady, no gloating, no emotion, just the faintest tilt of my head, letting it all land. Cracks started to appear in Clay's calm. His hand bounced on the table, fingers drumming an uneven rhythm. He whispered something to the junior attorney who just stared ahead, white as printer paper. The opposing counsel closed the folder slowly. Let's take a short break, he said, not a suggestion, a lifeline. As they filed out, Clay hesitated, looked back at me like he wanted to say something clever. I beat him to it. I told you I got it, I said. And then I looked away. Because the shift had already happened, and the storm was no longer mine to carry. The recorder beeped twice. Red light on. Everything officially on the record. Deposition of Nancy Raines regarding case number 50,873 Syntrix Solutions versus Raines, held in the offices of Alvarado Legal, 10:02 a.m., recorded under state jurisdiction. I adjusted my collar, sat up straight, and folded my hands. My lawyer Raphael sat beside me, calm as a monk, pen uncapped but untouched. Across the table, Syntrix's legal team rearranged papers they no longer believed in. The energy had shifted, no more smug certainty, no more tight smiles, just a waiting room for disaster. Opposing counsel, Mr. Gilchrist, cleared his throat. He was a gray suit kind of man, polished, seasoned, paid to stay unshakable, but even his fingers trembled slightly as he held up the statute printout. I'll now read into the record the section of the current state employment statute that governs enforceability of non-compete agreements post-termination, effective as of January 1st of this year. He began slowly, like he was reciting scripture he didn't want to understand. Section 214.9b. In the event that an employer fails to deliver written severance documentation within a period not exceeding 7 calendar days from the date of employment termination pause. His eyes flicked up toward Clay. Then any pre-existing non-compete clause included in the employee's contract is considered void and unenforceable, retroactive to the employee's exit date. Silence. The kind that rings. The kind that makes grown men sweat under air conditioning. He stared down at the page like it had insulted his mother. Then, slowly, deliberately, he looked up at Clay. "I want this clarified, for the record," he said. "Mr. Morley, when exactly did you terminate Miss Rains?" Clay blinked. We had a meeting. I mean, it was more of a restructuring discussion date, please," Gilchrist interrupted. I believe it was the Monday before last." Gilchrist raised an eyebrow. "And the severance paperwork was submitted when?" Clay shifted in his chair. "Well, we processed that by the end of the week, if I recall." The HR rep, who hadn't spoken all morning, corrected him without lifting her head. "It was submitted the following Friday." A beat. Gilchrist narrowed his eyes. "So, 9 days later." Clay looked at her, then at me, then at the conference table like it might offer answers. Apparently, he muttered. Gilchrist's mouth pressed into a flat line, and he said something I wasn't expecting. Something that would become the hinge point of the entire case. He reread the statute's final sentence under his breath. Then, louder this time, void and unenforceable, retroactive to the employee's exit date. He paused again. Then, with his jaw tight, he turned to Clay and asked, "Mr. Morley, when exactly did you fire her?" Clay opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Well, you didn't send formal notification until later, but you informed her verbally 9 days before the paperwork." "Yes, but then per your own admission and your own internal communications, your company violated the 7-day limit." Clay tried to recover. "This seems like a technicality. Law is technicality," Gilchrist snapped, voice harder than anything I'd heard from him before. "You had one job, 7 days, and you blew it." Across the room, one of the junior attorneys quietly closed her laptop. No one else moved. Clay looked around for help, found none. The HR lead was staring at her fingernails like they'd just become deeply fascinating. Another lawyer typed something without looking up. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Because for the first time since this circus began, it wasn't me under the microscope, it was them. Gilchrist rubbed his forehead. "We're going to need a recess," he muttered. Raphael nodded, cool as ever, of course. The court reporter stopped the recording, red light off. And in that tiny, sacred window between silence and motion, I caught Clay looking at me. Searching for something, mercy, maybe, or understanding, or an escape hatch that no longer existed. I met his eyes. I didn't blink. I didn't gloat. I just let the moment land, heavy and final. Because vindication doesn't need a victory speech. Sometimes all it takes is the truth, read aloud, by their own damn lawyer. By the next morning, the lawsuit evaporated like it had never existed. No formal apology. No dramatic email thread. Just a quiet withdrawal notice filed through the court's electronic portal at 7:46 a.m., buried under jargon and legal footnotes. Synthrix's signature was there, right beside the line that read "Plaintiff voluntarily dismisses all claims with prejudice." Legal equivalent of slamming the door and pretending you meant to leave anyway. Raphael forwarded it to me with a subject line that just said, "And that's breakfast." 24 hours earlier, they'd been ready to bury me in cease and desists and NDA threats. Now, gone, poof, like a magic trick done badly, and the cracks widened fast. Clay naturally started throwing elbows. HR was his first scapegoat. He told the board it was their delay, claimed he gave verbal approval and that the chain of execution fell apart below him. Executive speak for "it's not my fault," the peasants fumbled. What Clay didn't know, what no one ever seems to understand, is that when you treat people like disposable parts, they stop keeping your secrets. 2 hours after the lawsuit was dropped, an anonymous Dropbox link landed in Raphael's inbox. No message. Just a file labeled Clay Approval Delay MSG. It was a full internal email thread from Synthrix HR, forwarded and compiled with timestamps. In it, Clay explicitly told HR to hold off on sending Rain's severance until I've reviewed her exit interview transcript, adding we need to protect ourselves if she acts out. The kicker? The email was dated the day after my termination conversation. He delayed it, willingly, purposefully. His signature sat on the digital desk for 9 days while I was in limbo. Within hours, that email leaked. First to internal Slack channels, then to someone on the board, then to an inbox at Insider Tech, a mid-tier blog hungry for HR drama with a side of startup blood. Headline dropped that afternoon: Synthrix legal scandal. CTO's signature delay triggers lawsuit collapse. That was the beginning of the end. Investors started calling, not gently, not privately. Public calls on shareholder forums, demands for transparency, mentions of fiduciary negligence. One even dropped the phrase "failure to disclose internal liability risk." VC for "we trusted you and now we want your head." By Thursday, Clay was no longer on the executive calendar. By Friday, the company issued a one-line internal memo. Clay Morley will be stepping away from Synthrix Solutions to focus on his health. That's corporate code for he got pushed so hard his soul dislocated. I didn't celebrate. Not really. My team, what was left of it, texted me champagne emojis and gifs of fireworks. Someone even sent me a screenshot of Clay's LinkedIn bio being edited in real time. Former CTO turned strategic tech advisor, then just technologist. Then it vanished altogether. And while the vultures picked over his carcass, my inbox lit up with something else entirely. An email from Covenant Point Ventures. Major player, They backed Fennel's second round. People who normally wouldn't give me the time of day unless I was wearing a founder badge and standing under a spotlight. Subject, we believe you're owed a conversation. No pitch deck requested. No strings. Just a line at the bottom that said, we've been watching. Let's talk. I forwarded it to Raphael with a smiley face. He replied, told you. Still, I didn't dance in the ashes. I closed my laptop, packed up my files, reorganized my folder labeled ARC into subfolders titled Covenant, Fennel, and Next. Because while everyone else saw this as an ending, me finally free, Clay finally dethroned, I knew better. I wasn't done. I hadn't even launched. Launch day didn't feel like launch day. It felt like Tuesday. No countdown, no confetti. Just a quiet hum of nervous fingers typing last-minute commits, Slack channels buzzing like electric bees, and someone cursing because the homepage favicon wouldn't render on Safari. Classic. But when Fennel's new platform went live, streamlined, bulletproof, faster than anything Synthrix ever touched, it was mine. Not legally. Foundationally. The codebase bore my fingerprints. The architecture? Lifted straight from the notebooks I'd filled during lonely midnight shifts Clay once called non-billable distractions. Now it was powering real-time compliance automation for 4 major clients and counting. My name sat clean on the founder slate, not buried in legalese, not shuffled under some special thanks section. Top row, co-founder, architectural lead. No one could steal that anymore. That same morning, a blog post started trending on LinkedIn. I didn't follow the link until Raphael texted it to me with a single word, enjoy. It was from Clay. Well, Clay M. Now he'd shortened it like we wouldn't recognize the man who once tried to copyright my ideas. Title: I made mistakes as CTO's reflection on leadership, ego, and change. 3 paragraphs of vague regret, something about the cost of ambition, something else about failing to recognize great talent when it's right in front of you. No names, no details, just enough smoke to suggest fire, and enough silence to let everyone fill in the blanks. The comment section was a war zone, some called it brave, others weren't so generous. One reply just read, you made mistakes or you got caught, I didn't comment, I didn't share it, I didn't even finish reading. Because just after noon I sat down for one interview. Small podcast, tech founders, nothing major. The host asked the usual questions. What inspired the platform? How did Fennel get started? Was it like going from legacy company burnout to startup freedom? Then she leaned in, voice softer. Do you ever regret leaving Synthrix? I smiled. No, I said, I didn't leave, I was released. I let that hang for a second. Legally, I added, that made all the difference. The host laughed, the audience would too, but I wasn't joking. Because that severance delay, that misplaced arrogance, that single overlooked signature, it had opened the floodgates. They tried to silence me, contain me, bind me in fear and fine print. Instead, they kicked the door open to everything they told me I couldn't build. After the interview, I walked into my new office. Second floor, big windows, natural light so sharp it made the screens hard to read. I didn't hang degrees, didn't print out headlines or frame the lawsuit notice. Just one thing marked the glass door: Nancy Rain's no title, no fluff, because if they knew my name before, they'd remember it now. Big thanks for watching, you sneaky seniors. Subscribe to keep the coffee pot brewing revenge. Your ex-colleagues won't know what hit 'em.